Good morning, everyone. They're trying to grab some folks outside, but let's get started just so we can have plenty of time for questions. Um, Welcome to the Electric Avenue, our energy panel. I think that was a song a while back. A little about me. My name is Diana Rodriguez. I am vice president at Actum. We're a global consulting firm, and I am part of the government affairs team here in Los Angeles. So I get the pleasure of being the moderator for you this morning. So let's begin by thanking our track sponsors this morning. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, as well as our panel sponsor, the Western States Petroleum Association, also known as WISPA. The bios of each of the panelists are already in the journal, so I am going to make a very brief introduction so that we may have more time for questions. Kevin Barker, Senior Manager of Energy and Environmental Policy, Southern Cal Gas. Erica Bauman, Vice President on Strategy, Planning, and Performance, Southern California Edison. Dr. Mark Nekadam, Senior Director of Science and Technology, WISPA. Jay Lim, Manager of Power System Resource, LADWP. And please take a look at your journals. Their bios are in there. They're very impressive folks here. So please take a look. Energy management and sustainability are critical as California pursues ambitious environmental goals. The sector is undergoing transformation towards cleaner energy sources, from renewables to efficiency strategies. Ensuring grid reliability and stability during the transition is crucial. This panel explores innovations and policies shaping the energy landscape, balancing implementations with economic impacts. I'm going to give each of the panelists a couple of minutes to make an opening statement to get things started, and then we are going to ask some questions of each of you, and then open it up for questions. The first question, which I want to hear from each of you, is what is the current state of the energy sector in the United States and California, particularly in light of the ambitious renewable energy goals set forth by the state? Let's start with Kevin.
All right. So let me take maybe a quick step back. I'll start with kind of just the 2 minutes on the current state of the energy sector. So globally, about the energy sector is fueled essentially from about 80% molecules and 20% electricity. That ratio may be a little bit different in California, but we do expect that ratio to change and start to flip over as we electrify more of the transportation sectors and as well as building energy sector. So that's the sort of the long-term, I think, vision of where the energy is going. But in the short term, I think we still need to make headway in reducing GHG emissions immediately. I think of especially focusing on short-lived climate pollutants early on is a big goal of SoCal Gas. The state has a goal of reducing methane leakage from our existing infrastructure 20% by 2025, 40% by 2030. In 2021, through mitigation, detection, and repairs, we were able to reduce methane leakage by 37%. So we far surpassed our 2025 goal and moving quickly towards the 2030 goal. So I think that's first and foremost really important, as SLPs have a much greater impact on climate change than, say, CO2 emissions. It's also really important for us to look at capturing methane emissions from other sources like dairies, landfills. The state of California does have a goal with SB 1383 to actually divert about up to 75% of organics from our landfills and utilize for compost or energy production. So those are, I think, really, really important goals in the near term to help reduce GHG emissions. There's a sister goal with SB 1440 to actually utilize those avoided methane emissions, capture them, and then to inject them into our existing pipeline. So when you think of SoCal Gas, we serve a population of over 20 million customers. That's equivalent to about 1 out of every 20 Americans. So the magnitude of the population and the demand that we serve is quite large. And so if you have a goal with SB 1440 to increase RNG up to about 12% by 2030, that can actually result in huge numbers of GHG emissions by utilizing the existing infrastructure. The other thing I guess I would just note on from a high level is we are looking at other ways to decarbonize our fossil molecules, either through hydrogen, whether that's blended into the existing pipelines or dedicated pipelines, and then also point source carbon capture, as well as direct air capture for residual emissions that are currently being released into the atmosphere. So I'll leave it at that. I'll get a little bit more into details later. But that is the strategy for SoCal Gas to help, especially in the near and midterm, and then some of the big infrastructure projects for the long term on, partnering with the state to meet our 2045 carbon neutrality goals.
Thank you, Kevin. And then can you just 2 seconds tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You forgot that part.
I'm with SoCal Gas, Senior Manager for Energy Environmental Policy. I've been with the utility for about 4 years. Our role is to work with the non-regulatory agencies, so not the CPUC. We work with folks like the local air district here, South Coast, San Joaquin Valley, Ventura, the desert air districts, and then the California Energy Commission, Air Resources Board, and then federal government agencies. And I got this role because my background was working in state government for a number of years.
Thank you, Kevin. Erica, a little bit about yourself, and then on to the question. I could repeat it if you like.
Sure. So Erica Bowman, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I work with Southern California Edison, who is an electric provider to Southern California. So we serve around 50,000 square miles of geographic land, and then we have 15 million people that we serve electricity to. I lead our strategy, planning, and performance organizations. Part of that planning piece is not just business planning, but also our long-term planning. So we focus a lot on thinking about how we are actually going to meet the state goals of fully decarbonizing by 2045, and then also some of the other goals and bills in terms of how are we going to be carbon-free electricity-wise through SB 100 by 2045 as well. In terms of just kind of some of the interesting pieces or findings that we've had over the years, we released a white paper in 2023 that focused on, okay, what really would it take? What do we believe would be kind of the most feasible pathway to get to the 2045 numbers, knowing what we know today about technology as well as our expectations around how that technology evolves. Now, we're projecting 20-some years into the future, so there's a lot of room for different outcomes. I expect there will be different outcomes, but in that work, one of the things that we found was that our electric load itself for the state of California would almost double. And that would be really through the electrification of transportation as well as buildings. Now, that creates some challenges that we'll talk through. I won't get into it now, but I'm certain throughout the questions and conversation, I can go into more detail. But that by increasing load by 2 times roughly, that really means you need to build out your grid. So what does the transmission, how do you connect the renewable resources to the grid, to load centers? You need transmission. What we found as well is that the build rate for transmission through 2045 from an annual perspective would need to increase 3 times the rate that we currently do today. That's a lot. That's a lot of additional transmission, 3 to 4 times of what we currently do. And it already takes 10 to 12 years to get a transmission line built on average. It's a real challenge. We need to start today. Otherwise, we're not going to have the transmission capacity to support the renewables that we need to develop. In addition to that, you also need to serve the actual load. You need to serve all those technologies that are coming onto your system, whether it's electric cars, electric fleets, or heat pumps in your buildings. That, when we look at the analysis, requires 10 times the build out of distribution capacity relative to the rate that we do today. So obviously something needs to change. We at Southern California Edison need to change our own processes. We need to build things differently. We need to make things more affordable. But there's a lot of just change that needs to happen, not just the rate, but also how we do things, and we'll get more into it, but a lot of interesting challenges and opportunities because of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Dr. Negadon?
Great. Thank you. Mark Negadam, Senior Director for Science and Technology with Western States Petroleum Association. I just realized up here are the big bad boys and girls from the industry, but we're the only ones who are certifiably evil, apparently. Sorry, I just couldn't resist it. Sorry. But thank you for the invitation. It's my first FICA conference. You have quite a reputation, and very pleased to be here and pleased to be a sponsor. The first thing I just wanted to lay out here is we must decarbonize not only the transportation sector, but all sectors. Kevin, you pointed out that 80% is currently combustion of molecules. Most of that combustion generates some form of carbon, and throwing 30 billion tons every year of excess carbon into the atmosphere is not a good way to keep the planet happy. So we have to solve that problem. And I can't speak for the entire industry, oil and gas industry, but I can speak for our members who are major players in that industry, that every single one of them is absolutely committed to a decarbonization future. We must get there. So there's no argument about the goals. I think it's really the pathways and the means that we're most concerned about. I'm going to throw some numbers out here, just kind of hang in front of you, that Californians currently drive 340 billion miles every year. That's actually a drop of 40 billion miles from 2022 data. This is EIA data. That's so many trips to the sun. I couldn't get Wi-Fi, so I didn't want to cheat on my facts here, but that's a lot of miles. And that's just cars, trucks, and they're not counting trains and ships. $74 billion a year California spend on gasoline alone. $74 billion. So that's a big chunk of change. But that is driving the fifth largest economy in the world, which is $3.6 trillion GDP. And we just moved from third to fourth place in terms of the size of the fuel market, the liquid transportation fuel market. We're just behind the United States, the rest of the United States, China, Brazil is now third, and then California. My point is the pace and scale of what we're trying to change is just enormous. This isn't just any old economy. If we were a sovereign country, we'd have our own currency and a standing army, I'm sure. The concern from my members, my job as the kind of nerd-in-chief at WISPA is to look at the actual data. We've just conducted a study that I'm happy to share more details with you. We can get into it later. But one of the major conclusions is that the fuel supply chain in California is on a knife edge of supply and demand. We have taken most of the slack out of the system. We are down to 9, soon to be 8, refineries for carbob gasoline. And demand does not seem to be abating at the rate that the state agencies are modeling in order to set policy. So we're very concerned. What happens if we get it wrong? What happens if we prematurely abandon current infrastructure or improvements in current infrastructure to lower the carbon profile? And will we at some point, and we keep saying publicly, will we at some point in the fuel supply chain have our own Diablo Canyon moment? No offense to the participants here. But Diablo Canyon was 9% of the entire grid of California. We were about to shut it down. We are very, very concerned that the cumulative effect of multiple constraining policies, and believe me, this is not the oil and gas guy complaining about regulation. This is not the tone. The tone is we're very, very worried that the demand cannot be met if we keep constraining at several pinch points that I'm happy to talk more about because I did my 2 minutes already. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Very informative. And then we have Jay Lim.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jay Lim. I'm the manager of resource planning at LADWP. I've been with the department for about 16 years. The first 5 years I spent in engineering, working on major projects, including transmission projects and generation station projects. I spent the bulk of my career in power system planning, overseeing the integrated resource planning group. We do long-term planning for the power system out to 2045, and we use various modeling tools, including production cost modeling, to look at cost benefit of different strategies. Over the last 10 years, we've seen such a significant change in policy. When I first started with power system planning, we were evaluating how to get to 33% renewable by 2020. And since then, we've surpassed that. And the state has a law of 100% clean energy by 2045. The department is a lot more progressive. Our local leaders directed us to partner with the National Renewable Energy Lab. And we did a 3-year study called the LA 100 study to look at what investments would be needed to get us to 100% renewable by 2045 or earlier. And that study looked at various scenarios, and we, with the direction of our local leaders, have committed to 100% carbon-free by 2035. And the way we plan to achieve this is through multiple strategies. Many of these strategies resonate on the state level as well. The first is coal replacement. The department used to be very heavy with coal. We had a number of coal power plants, Navajo, Coal Strip, and Intermountain Power Project. We've divested of all of them except for Intermountain Power Project. That's our last coal-fired generating station, which we will replace by mid next year. So by July 1st of 2025, we'll be completely coal-free. And this is important for us because coal has about double the carbon intensity as natural gas. So it'll help us quickly decarbonize. That's one of the low-hanging fruits that we see. We also have very aggressive renewable portfolio standard goals. Today, we're about 40% renewable, and the state's goal is 60% by 2030 in about 6 years. Our department has an even accelerated goal of 80% by 2030. So this will be some of the short-term goals that we'll need to achieve, and we're making progress. We signed some contracts recently in 2021 with Red Cloud Wind, which is a very large wind project in New Mexico, over 330 megawatts. And we're on schedule to put in service Eland Solar and Storage, which is a total of 400 megawatts of solar plus battery. So that project is underway. And in order to support the increased renewables, we have very aspirational goals with energy storage and transmission. With energy storage, we're projecting that we'll need about 1,000 more megawatts of energy storage by 2030. We currently have Castaic Power Plant, which is a pumped hydro power plant that helps us to integrate renewables and provide load following to help provide energy during the peak hours. But with transmission, we have currently in the pipeline about 70 different transmission projects that will help us import additional renewables. Along with that, some of the challenges that we see is the replacing our generating stations that are currently using once-through cooling or ocean water for cooling. Because of the EPA Rule 316B, we have to cease use of once-through cooling by 2030, so maintaining firm capacity. And as we decarbonize, we also want to keep customers involved, and we're doing this through a number of programs on the distributed energy resource side. We have a number of programs, including energy efficiency, local solar. Recently, we had got approval for the demand side grid support that will enable batteries on the customer level, and, as well as demand response. So customer participation will also become important as we decarbonize. And last, as some of the panel members spoke to, is electrification of transportation and buildings. We see this as a huge opportunity for us because it'll help us increase our electric sales that essentially will lower fixed costs for customers. So we're looking at that as an opportunity to help affordability, but also leverage the utility sector to help decarbonize other sectors like transportation and buildings. So as the state moves forward towards decarbonization and the Department of Water and Power is also moving along, we want to consider reliability, environment, and cost affordability to balance those three as we seek to meet the state goals and our local policy goals.
Thank you. The next question is for Mark. Our current transportation infrastructure is already at risk due to the cumulative effects of policies intended to reduce GHGs while controlling costs. What are some of the key pinch points you see in the system?
Yeah, thanks. And I didn't write that question. I really didn't. But I'm willing to tell you about it. And a lot of it comes from the study that I just mentioned. The acronym, just for your reference, is TESCI. I got tired of typing over and over again the Transportation, Energy, Supply Chain, Infrastructure, and Investment Study. You can imagine I didn't have a macro for that in Word. So it's called TESCI. 3 key findings plus knock-on effects. One is that production, that is California domestic production of crude oil, used to cover for many decades somewhere between 50 and 30% of the total demand for crude in the state. We are now floating downward fast at 15% decline per year, at about 24% now, which means that we are importing more crude in order to meet the demand for refined product. There's a knock-on effect of reducing production in the state, and that is the pipelines that carry the crude oil from where it's produced, Central Coast, San Joaquin Valley, to Bay Area and Southern California. Those pipelines have an average minimum throughput of about 30%. If you drop below 30% of their design capacity, they are likely to shut down. And once a pipeline shuts down, it's not likely to come back up. So we have actually a great, big, huge strategic petroleum reserve in western Kern County, but we can't get to it. And most of that fall off, and I used to be the director of the Department of Conservation, so I know these numbers intimately. Most of that fall off is because the industry simply cannot get permits to produce, to drill, to renew wells, et cetera. So if the pipelines go down, refineries in the Bay Area and in Southern California that rely on California domestic crude are going to have to make some very, very hard choices because they simply cannot import across the dock. That's the third P, which is ports. That's the major pinch point. Given that ports are already working at very tight capacity, increasing the flow of either refined product or crude oil across the dock generally is going to be a major challenge. And then we have the at-berth regulations that'll come into effect in Southern California, January 1, 2025, next year. So we're looking at major pinch points in the fuel supply system, and our argument, and it was my testimony before the Assembly about 2 weeks ago, is focusing on minimum inventories or other tiny tweaks in the supply chain, in the supply of gasoline is not the problem. The larger problem is the major pieces that are now in danger of essentially falling apart. And I'm not one who is prone to hyperbole. I'm a scientist by training. This scares the hell out of me. I'll leave it there.
Wow. Thank you for that answer. Our next question is for Erica. How can we ensure that all Californians, particularly in underserved communities, have equitable access to renewable energy and related infrastructure?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think there have been historically, as we think about energy infrastructure and how that's been built out over time and different access points as it relates to disadvantaged communities, certain communities have suffered more at pollution than others. And I think there's really a historical issue there that needs to be right-sized and corrected over time. One of the challenges is, in addition to that, there's just a broader question about affordability and how do you make certain that people are able to afford the energy that they need for their daily lives. So that's an issue. Then you also have, well, how there are certain programs that the state has, such as net energy metering. We've had that for decades. That has been great in terms of getting rooftop solar on houses. It has been a great program. It's been very successful. There have been different revisions to the rules as the market has matured from a solar, rooftop solar standpoint. We are very, as an electric company, I think there's a narrative out there at times that we're not supportive of rooftop solar. That's not the case. We very much like rooftop solar. We expect and need more of it as we look to achieve our 2045 goals. The challenge that we have had over time, and I think this gets to the affordability question and to the access question for disadvantaged communities, is that the rates, so the installations and the benefit when people install that solar system, because there's certain benefits and incentives that are passed to the people who install, but because it's based on rates, and it's really a transfer across rate classes, it is the folks who benefit, it's being paid for by those who have not made that installation. So you have folks that don't have solar are actually paying more for their electricity today relative to those folks that do. And from our perspective, if that incentive structure were actually taken out of the rate design, those types of incentives were deployed at the state level, and some of them are at the federal level, but if you actually had it at the state level coming out of the general fund or some other type of mechanism, but not from the rates classes, that a person who does not have the funds to install solar is now paying for the person that does, that's been a real challenge. Currently today, people who have not installed solar pay $18 a month more relative to those who have, just to pay for the actual incentive, not even the actual generation that is produced from the solar panel. So there's a lot of challenges with equity just in the programs that are designed to move the needle on clean energy. And it's something that we have been working on. It's something that I think a lot of folks recognize as an issue, but there's also real challenges of changing it because obviously the state has its own budget crisis, its own challenges with getting the right revenue. And when you're constrained from that perspective, it's very hard to move something out of current funding stream into something that the state would support. So there's different things there, but I think that's one of the big ones. We need to make certain that electric rates are affordable so that people really do have access to the technologies that we're talking about.
Thank you. It's very interesting. My parents actually were part of that program, so I know it well. Next question is for Kevin. What collaborative efforts between utilities and policymakers are needed to address the technical and economic challenges of California's energy transition?
Great, thanks, Diana. So I'll touch on two opportunities that are actually already existing, and so I think supporting these opportunities are critical. So SoCalGas in 2021, we announced our Aspire 2045, and essentially what that says at a very high level is that we plan to decarbonize our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions fully to net zero by 2045. Scope 1 and 2, so those are our direct emissions, either through combustion at our facilities or through use of electricity at our facilities, only comprise, unfortunately, of less than 5% of the total emissions. So the other 95% or more are Scope 3 emissions, in which we have a lot less control over. Through programs like SB 1440 and procurement of RNG, we can actually help to start to decarbonize our core customers. But the total throughput on our system, core customers represent about 40%. So 60% are all the other folks, and a lot of the folks here and members of VICA. And so one way that we've been looking to collaborate with policymakers is through hydrogen. And the state is looking to create a California hydrogen hub. And so they have, led by the Governor's Office of Economic Development, have created a coalition of industry members, policymakers, utilities to bring a hydrogen hub to California. And this group is called ARCHES. ARCHES applied for a DOE grant and were awarded the largest grant out of, I think, about 7 grants that DOE funded for $1.2 billion to potentially come to California. SoCalGas is a member of ARCHES, and ARCHES has a lot of different components all throughout California. But the component that we're looking to provide value in is what we call Angeles Link. And so what Angeles Link is hoping to do is really look at those hard to abate sectors. So think folks like in the industrial sector, what we would say heavy duty transportation or goods movement, long haul transportation, and then also electric generation. The goal of ARCHES is to create a pipeline from the eastern part of California desert all the way to the Los Angeles load centers, bringing about 500,000 tons to 1.5 million tons of clean hydrogen produced in the desert to the load centers. The potential that Angeles Link could provide is equivalent to the reduction of about 1 million vehicles off the road in whenever it would come into fruition, let's say middle of 2035. It's a proposed project, but it is a way of partnering with the state to bring economic development and really to focus on the hard to abate. I think I should start also by giving kudos to the electric utilities. The majority of our emissions reductions today have really been because of the emission reductions from the electric utilities. 2 big pieces of that, we've talked about renewable procurement, and then Jay was also talking about coal reduction. So the RPS began in 2002, really didn't get a jump start until the last, let's say, economic crisis in 2009 with federal stimulus dollars to jumpstart the renewable market. But really a big piece of the GHG emission reductions from the electricity sector came from a bill in 2006. And no, it wasn't AB 32. It was SB 1368, which actually required divestments in coal. And so that was where we actually saw a lot of early GHG reductions. So by then also now looking at hard to abate and partnering with the state, we can see that there's a great opportunity to start to see a lot of reduction in GHG from some of the other sectors. The other partnership I think I would like to, let's say, lean into is electric reliability. Erica noted, and I didn't know the number was so high, but tenfold increase in, I'm guessing it's the distribution system.
The rate of distribution.
Rate of distribution. That's huge. One thing that we haven't mentioned with regard to electric load are data centers. And so what is the impact that data centers will have? The Energy Commission used to be the one-stop shop for certification of natural gas generators. They don't necessarily do that anymore, but they certify diesel generators. That's what the certification process has become, and it's for backup. A lot of the case for backup generators for data centers. So could we partner with the goal of providing cleaner fuels that can help with reliability of high quality and high need loads to meet their electric demands, but also with a cleaner product. And so we're looking at things like fuel cells or linear generators that could either be directly tied into the existing natural gas system, in which we could deliver RNG at a carbon, say, free or maybe carbon negative intensity to provide backup for these high energy loads. This could also happen with transportation electrification. So when I think about, let me go back and I think about building electrification. As you replace a gas appliance with electric appliance, you may start to see load kind of in a peanut butter spread increase over time, but it may not be huge load changes all at once. But when you think about the goals that ARB has set with regard to advanced clean fleets and the desire to turn a lot of their existing large fleets over to zero emission opportunities, these could come at hundreds and hundreds of electric vehicle chargers all in one location. That is a big chunk of load that will happen overnight. There is a logistics company in Torrance, Prologis, in which they are trying to comply, and they are complying with the Advanced Clean Fleet by electrifying their heavy-duty fleet that pull goods from the San Pedro ports to their offload facility to then go out and move. And they were going to have, it was going to take them some time to be able to electrify their EV chargers. And so they were able to work with Mainspring, which is a linear generator company, to within, I think it was 9 months, to install linear generators that are plugged into the natural gas system that could, without any changes to the technology, utilize RNG, or if they want, can actually utilize hydrogen, again, without any changes to the technology. And so the exact technology that they installed can get cleaner and greener without any replacements. And so they now have 98 chargers within a 9-month time frame. They were able to construct 98 chargers and have now been able to almost fully electrify those fleets. And so we think that partnering with the goals of the state, we can also provide advantages. And then I would just say this, to me, it's not a sunk infrastructure cost, because when the distribution system is built up, those generators can now actually, let's say, bid into the CAISO market and can actually help during peak times and sell electricity back to the grid during times of need. So I think if we think about things kind of holistically and collaboratively, we can really make strides in the near term to meet some of our midterm goals and provide GHG reductions today.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is partnerships are very important.
Yeah.
Great. And our next question is for Jay. With California's ambitious renewable goals, what specific strategies or technologies is LADWP implementing to ensure grid stability and manage peak demand during the transition?
Okay. Thank you for the question. So with the rise of renewables, energy storage will continue to play a crucial role for the department to reliably serve its customers. The department is very fortunate in that we already have our crown jewel of Castaic Power Plant as part of our energy mix. It's a pumped hydro project that was commissioned early on. And in the past, Castaic was used as a battery for the department. It was pumping during weekends when loads were low, and during the week when loads were high, it was discharging. We've seen that because of renewables have increased, that Castaic's operations has dramatically shifted to now, particularly in the springtime, when solar is abundant, we see Castaic operate to charge during the middle of the day to avoid overgeneration from solar, which is more cost economic, and discharge at night when the solar goes down in order to serve our customers. We see that will continue to change, especially as renewables ramp up. So there's two key issues with managing the penetration of renewables. One is load following to manage the peak loads. Traditionally, peak loads have been from 3 to 5 when customer usage, in the middle of the day when customer air conditioner loads were high. However, because of more solar into the system, that has shifted our peak load, which we now call the net peak load, to 5 to 7 p.m. timeframe. So that's when the sun starts to set, customers come home, they turn on their lights, and that's when the demand for electricity is now the highest. So we see energy storage playing a critical role to help shift some of that solar from the middle of the day towards that nighttime. And in the last 10 years, we've done numerous studies to look at, in the future power system, whether or not our system will be flexible enough to handle the intermittency of renewables, solar and wind. Sometimes cloud covers comes over and causes the production to be very volatile, very similar with wind. So energy storage helps to smooth that intermittency, but it also helps to essentially called energy arbitrage, shift some of that excess solar from the middle of the day to nighttime. And so department, our most latest energy storage project is Beacon battery. It's a very small battery. We commissioned it as a pilot project, but it's about 20 megawatts, half hour. And we wanted to see how that would interact with our resources, and we've found some net benefit. But over the next 6 years, we'll have to install a lot more energy storage. I talked earlier about Eland. That's our next large-scale energy storage project. It's solar co-located with battery, and it's about a 300 megawatt, 4-hour battery that will provide us with consistent flow of energy throughout the night. There's also other strategies that the department is looking at. We recently joined the energy imbalance market in 2021, and by joining the EIM market, this helps us to balance excess resources. We can sell any excess solar into the market, and we can buy any excess. We actually found the net benefit from joining the EIM in that it helped us to reduce our gas usage, and it helped to reduce our curtailments. One recent win for the department is we recently got approved for the demand side grid demand side grid program that helps us to enable batteries on a customer level. So with this program, we currently have about 700 megawatts of local solar, and this we see that it will spur the adoption of local batteries. So customers will will be incentivized to adopt batteries, and that we can use that to help balance renewables and balance the grid. We've also are ramping up our demand response program. We currently have over 100 megawatts of demand response, and that continues to grow. Our Power Savers program, which is a smart thermostat program, helps us to manage peak loads. And with an aggressive goal of 80% renewable by 2030, we see that a lot more energy storage will be needed. So we currently have a request for proposal out that is looking at options for energy storage. And more recently, with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, energy storage is now, standalone energy storage is now eligible for the incentive tax credit. So it's about 30% off, so that we hope that will spur the development of energy storage for the department. However, there are some challenges with energy storage, as we've seen with the pandemic. Recently, we've seen prices gone up, high interest rates. So we were hoping that energy storage prices would decline, like solar, over the last 10 years. However, they still haven't declined to a price point where we see a lot of cost benefits. So we're kind of in a wait and see mode. We also have some opportunities with grant funding and incentive tax credits. And so in order to integrate renewables, energy storage will continue to play a critical role, and it'll not only provide us with capacity needs, but also help balance out the intermittency of renewables, both on a large scale and on a customer level.
Thank you for that. Now, at this time, we could either go on for some other questions, or I could open it up for some questions from the audience, because you have experts up here, and I think it's a really great time to ask anything that you want to know. So anybody have a question? Let's see. Can you hear it?
Yeah. Yep.
Can you hear?
So I can take a stab at what our modeling has found. So in our countdown work, there's a couple of things that when you look at a share of wallet perspective from a residential household, so that would include your natural gas, electricity bills, as well as gasoline for transportation. We have seen an expectation that you would pay less money than you do today. And we've also seen that between 30 and 40% of a reduction. Now, there's a lot of assumptions that go into that. One of the big assumptions is that we're able to manage the load on the electric system in a way that allows us to use our system more efficiently than we do today. One of the loads that is actually quite manageable, relatively speaking, is the electric transportation load. So that's a good thing. That means that you can time your charging a little bit differently with vehicles than you do in other like air conditioning when you actually just want to use it when it's hot. And the same issue occurs with heat pumps. You really want to use your heat pump when it's cold. So there's some things there. So if we're able to be effective at that, I think there's an opportunity for some cost savings. However, there's also that's in 2045, and that was one data point. The transition to that there's a different challenge there. And it kind of goes to your point. We're seeing a lot of pressures happening across all of the energy systems on the petroleum side, on the gas side, on our side. And there is a real challenge of just getting the new technologies. So there's one in terms of we do expect that we need clean firm generation at some point in the future. We do not have those technologies available today that are commercially viable and ready and at the right price point. So that includes carbon capture and storage for natural gas. That includes small modular nuclear, which we'd also have to change state law if we were going to do that here in California. That means hydrogen. Like hydrogen, there's more costs that need to come down there. It also means long duration storage, right? New technologies and long duration storage. Those aren't there yet. So we also need to make certain, and I think Mark also talked to this about as it relates to the petroleum side, we need to keep our capacity around, and this is just speaking for the electric side, of our natural gas facilities that we have today, or that have not announced any retirements. So that's to manage through all of those events that might only happen once or twice a year, but the weather events that Jay was talking about, when we have a long, maybe a week full in the wintertime of clouds, that you don't get the solar generation that you would need. So there's a real transition path. I think, yes, at the end of it, I think you could see some cost savings, but how we transition through it is a big question mark. And there's a lot of things we got to do, a lot of challenges that we have today that we got to work through. One last thing, and I'll stop. We got to change how long it takes to deploy infrastructure, whether it's on the gas side, on our side. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built, and the siting and permitting processes to do that. We have to change stuff internally. It's not all about external stuff. We're doing that now. We're doing a whole overhaul of how we're doing our work. But it needs to change because building transmission facilities in 10, 12 years that are now pushing to 15, that doesn't achieve the transition that we're trying to achieve in the timeline that we're trying to achieve it. So there's a lot of work to be done there as well.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Please.
Yes, Dave for Southern California Edison. I'm curious how you see the transportation sector changing. New York and some of the other metropolitan cities have transportation systems where we see a lot of, downtown LA population is more Gen X, younger folks who don't really, I'm talking folks who haven't had cars this year for 5 years and moved from the Midwest, and, they don't have an expectation to have cars when they live downtown. How do you see, every morning if I go to work, I have to plan about an hour and a half to get to work, and it would be very good if we had some time for transportation system that would benefit, and they also have a reduction of GHG emissions. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of planning to build out, but California, huge increase in EV, but you see more urban population or more dynamic pathway toward transportation system that can be utilized in community back and forth to work on a regular basis.
Anybody want to take a step?
I can speak a little bit to that on the department side. So we do see electrification of transportation being a critical element in transforming the power sector, as Erica mentioned, nearly doubling of our load. So we're very optimistic about that. We've done some studies in the past with Navigant and other consulting firms to look at how the trajectory of electrification would change. So we see light duty vehicles being converted from petroleum to electric being one of the sort of major factors towards increasing load. But it's also on urban level, uh, the medium and heavy duty. We see that as a huge potential for decarbonizing the power sector. So we have large customers like Metro. So they have plans to convert their buses from petroleum to electric. We're also in talks with Port of LA. They have some aggressive goals of converting their handling equipment over from gas to electric, as well as the docking equipment. And also LAX, they have like the People Mover and other plans that their projected load growth is so great that they've been planning with us to develop a new receiving station X, that will help support that additional load. So we think that the medium heavy duty, because those equipment are sometimes more polluting, that sometimes they're using more diesel fuel and they have less pollution control equipment, will help us to decarbonize on a greater economy scale. But we do see load growth continue to grow into the future, and it's very fluid because technologies change, and year to year you have more like models and more equipment, and so it's important for us to refine our resource plan every year to account for that, to be very fluid. So as we decarbonize our electric sector, we also have to keep an eye on transportation sector and buildings as well.
Maybe this
You wanna
isn't
take-
necessarily from a SoCal gas perspective, but it's just a philosophical answer. So the ARB puts out their scoping plan, which is essentially the roadmap on how do you get to GHG reductions by 2045. And within that, they assume, I believe it's like a 10% or 15% reduction in vehicle miles traveled. There aren't great ways to get to that. And in fact, some of our behaviors actually may be leading to the opposite effect with transportation network companies, and then potentially adding in more autonomous vehicles may mean actually more vehicle miles traveled. And so just an observation that, without alternatives, either that being public transit or, more bike paths, walking paths, or pedestrian paths, I think there's a hope and an assumption that VMT will go down, but human behavior may be driving us a little bit the other way.
If I could just add a footnote, thanks Kevin for mentioning, we call VMTs, vehicle miles traveled. The pandemic was a nice opportunity for a social experiment. What we saw was a shift of VMTs from people getting in cars and driving to work to Amazon trucks. So every VMT reduction strategy, at least in the United States, in the last 35 years, has maybe had a 2 to 3% effect. And the cost per VMT of substitution, this is Institute for Transportation Studies at Davis analysis, every cost of each vehicle mile traveled doubles or triples because of the overhead in shifting from individual transportation to public infrastructure. So that was a very long footnote. I apologize.
It's very informative. Your question?
Wanted to kind of build on an earlier comment, certainly we're in this scary gap. Refineries closing. There was the one that was announced, talked about just now, and we're not ready yet for energy storage or any other source to balance capacity. So, speaking of like a business, assuming you can't do everything in your organization needs to make all the changes happen that are necessary to get us, what can we do? What are businesses not doing, or what are we getting wrong in LA? Also drawing from the fact from everybody's talks about populations, California's not growing, we're shrinking. Our local population is less transient now. So people that are working in our businesses are actually more and more people that were born here than previous generations that came to this great golden state. So we are more vested in fixing, hopefully, LA County at least, than maybe the previous generation that they're all Yankees fans. We're Dodgers fans. So I understand and I respect all these great ideas that I'm hearing from, but if the gaps that exist and persist and equity issues, what should we be doing more of, or what are we doing wrong?
I'm going to give you a shameless advocacy response, not from the oil and gas industry. Our critique and our advocacy in Sacramento is not about GHG reductions. It's not about climate policy. It's about an excessive focus, I would even say obsessive focus, on electrification over every other opportunity. That combustion is increasingly unpopular. We have done a number of studies, not just we, WISPA. I mean, we worked with major consulting firms, McKinsey, Ramble, the whole list. And what we found is very rapid GHG reductions from drop-in fuels, from hybrids, hybrids with hydrogen fuel cell. I mean, there are a number of opportunities that we have right now with existing infrastructure, no major investment required to do radical reductions using all of the above energy strategies. And what we've found is an almost intransigence in CARB, the Energy Commission, in the governor's office, and attendant agencies. No, if it blows up, it's bad. And that's, to me, I mean, forget the advocacy part, it's just dumb policy, in my opinion. Now, that's the shameless advocacy part. What my direct response to you and the entire business sector, and especially small and medium-sized business, is to go to Sacramento or go to your representative and say, you need to think a little more broadly about this. You got to think a little harder and ask some harder questions than you're asking right now. So that's my shameless advocacy from WISPA.
So,
Thank you. I think there was a question.
I just want one quick response to that. I would say, from our perspective, we can get a lot of the way there on electrification and decarbonization with renewables and the technologies we have today. There's a 20% on the tail end that's really hard and needs a lot of work. On what you can do as businesses, though, from our perspective, as we plan, we need to know as early as possible what loads are coming at us. And if we can plan for that, and it doesn't even have to be completely certain on your end, but even if you're thinking about something that would have an impact on our grid, it is really important that we talk to you and we start incorporating that load into the planning that we're doing, because we're trying to build things out as fast as we can. And if it means that, hey, if there's 200 more megawatts of load on this circuit, we'd have to build a new one. Maybe it means, no, we build that circuit at just a higher voltage. And so just knowing what's coming is really important.
Thank you. Kevin, yeah.
Oh, I was just talk about practical solutions, and the biggest energy resource, and likely a lot of times the most cost effective, has been energy efficiency. And so if there are ways for, you know, businesses or, you know, industries that have older equipment, you know, look at lower cost solutions as an opportunity. They may not be the sexiest, but energy efficiency a lot of times can give you faster paybacks than some of the sexier technologies.
Thank you. And I think there was a question.
Well, well, I might have to give you a generic answer, but we're working towards it because 2030 is just right around the corner. So in the past, we've recently ramped up. We recently ramped up our distribution system planning, developing new groups and new planning groups, and ramping up our distribution engineering and folks as well. There still are many challenges to helping us meet our goals, especially on the distribution side, because what we found is we already have a lot of circuits that are overloaded, and so we have to address that before we start to prepare the grid for future electrifications. And so we're sort of working against the grain because we have a lot of work to do that's behind, but we also have new work to do. So it comes with prioritizing with the work. And one of the biggest challenge we have right now is just getting the people to do the work because of the pandemic. And our department, we have a lot of bureaucracy in terms of hiring. We can't hire as fast as we want to. So those are challenges that we're continuing to work through. We recently produced a integrated human resource plan to delineate how many personnel we need in order to meet the goals. But like I said, 2030 is just around the corner, so we're working towards those goals, and we do have a lot of challenges.
So I'd say we're working towards it as well in terms of, if we're going to meet it, I think if we don't meet it with the absolute permanent solutions, there's certainly bridging solution opportunities. I know that the organization's working through, and we'll at least have that in place if bridging into the longer permanent solutions.
Thank you.
I would add just a
Yes,
quick note. And this applies beyond my industry, but I can tell you in my industry, the investment horizon begins at 5 years and it starts to taper at about 12 years. So today in my industry is October 18th, 2029. Just today, it is 2029. Decisions being made today about development plans and attracting investment. You can listen to the quarterly earnings and investment calls. It's already 2035.
Thank you, Mark. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the panel this morning. Let's thank our track sponsors again, LADWP, and our panel sponsor, WISPA. Give everybody a round of applause. Thank you. And I just want to remind everybody that the next set of panels begins at 11:15, and they encourage you to visit all the folks outside. So thank you, and feel free to come up and ask questions if you want. You guys here.